Hi everybody, and welcome to the third mini-lecture of the week, Urbanization, Butte and Anaconda, Montana. I really need to extend my thanks to Julie P. for her contributions to this mini-lecture, as she has a lot of professional experience in the history of Anaconda. I was going to write a bit more on it last week, but really ran out of time complaining about unionists, so I decided to do it this week. And Julie used to be a historic preservation officer, so she has plenty of very good information and thoughts on this topic. And if there's information in here from Anaconda, chances are it's from Julie. So, again, thank her. This mini-lecture is going to talk about the interlocked cities of Butte and Anaconda and their development and decline. We're going to talk a bit about copper mining and processing, because I can't help it, and a bit about Butte, and a bit about Anaconda. Another of MSU's historians, Tim LeCain, wrote a book about the American copper mining industry and its prominence in the U.S. economy called Mass Destruction. You've likely heard of the industrial process of mass production, the organization and streamlining of manufacturing and industry to produce the greatest amount of goods in the most efficient manner. Its necessary twin is the system of mass consumption, where everyday consumers buy large quantities of goods instead of producing them on their own, a form of division of labor. Without a consumer basis, whether end consumers purchasing manufactured goods, or secondary industries buying parts and raw materials and such to make their own goods for sale, goods need a purchaser for industry to function. Tim LeCain argues that there's the third leg of this system, mass destruction and its associated technologies. Without the incredibly destructive power of the copper mining industry to reshape the landscape, neither mass production nor consumption would be possible. This is especially true in the copper industry, as copper enabled electrification. But, as Killing for Coal demonstrated, it's also a very energy-intensive process, where speed and scale means profitability and success. We can look at Butte's Berkeley Pit and the Anaconda smelter for a great example of mass destruction. Take a look at the image over here on the left. It's a 3D model of the underground and surface mines of Butte, Montana. The shafts, drives, and stopes are indicated by all these thin little fluorescent lines down here. By the end of underground mining in Butte, there are over 10,000 miles of mine shafts. You can see the Berkeley Pit in the background of the image, but as you can also see, it barely reaches the lowest, even the upper levels of the underground mines of Butte. Over decades, millions of tons of copper-bearing ores were mined in Butte. Initially, again, the majority of the mining was underground, as it was the prevailing method of mining. When the broken ore came out of the ground, it still wasn't in a form that had industrial uses, and needed to be milled and smelted to produce refined copper. But the ore also contained a bunch of other minerals, especially arsenic and cadmium. Butte initially did not have the smelter available to process its ore, and for the first few years of production, raw ore was shipped from Montana all the way to England to smelter facilities there. Later, Anaconda Copper built the smelter and town of Anaconda, reshaping the Silver Bow and Deer Lodge Valley with a tall smelter stack that belched noxious smoke. A key tenet of physics is that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, to separate the copper from other contents of the ore, the other contents still have to go somewhere. In the case of the arsenic and a lot of the other heavy metals, they either floated upwards with the smoke and then down with the winds and thermals, blanketing the valley with a toxic heavy metal and sickening a lot of cows. A technological solution to this problem involved capturing the arsenic in the smelter stack and then selling it as a pesticide for widespread use in treating beetle infestations in agricultural fields across the country, especially cotton and rice fields. So effectively, the industrial poisons taken out of the ground in Butte were spread across the country to combat pests, agricultural pests, and also to disperse the pollution of copper mining. So when we think about industrialization, urbanization, electrification, and copper, we should think about mass destruction as well. The light bulb, telegraph, wire, and radiator share as much history in the Butte copper mines and the Anaconda smelter, the arsenic contamination and tailings pile, as they do in the glittering electrification of the United States. You don't get streetlights and automobiles without giant sites of mass destruction and industrial pollution. Electricity meant modernity, and electricity didn't happen without copper mining. For an immigration official on Ellis Island from the 1890s until World War I, there was a certain common sight. As the barges docked to offload the steerage passengers, many of the young men had a destination. As many of them did not speak English, it was common for their family to have sewn a note or a piece of embroidered cloth to their jacket that read, "Send to Butte, Montana." Butte quickly became a booming city, known as a place where the mines were hiring. Immigrants from Europe swarmed to the richest hill on earth, seeking jobs in the mine. This polyglot of immigrants formed distinct ethnic communities, whether Irish, Finnish, German, Italian, or otherwise. Fun fact: the oldest continuously operating Chinese restaurant in the United States is in Butte, Montana. Butte's mines dictated life in the city. As the miners worked in shifts, the mines worked around the clock, and the miners were generally well paid. Miners tended to like to drink. Nothing quite cuts through the silica, dust, and sore muscles more than copious amounts of hard liquor. Butte earned the title of the wide open city, as its bars, clubs, casinos, and saloons served around the clock to deal with the fact that the mines operated around the clock and that there were always thirsty miners. Butte also earned the nickname the Gibraltar of Unionism. The Butte Miners' Union No. 1 was among the first and most powerful of the mining unions of the West, and later contributed to the founding of the Western Federation of Miners and the Industrial Workers of the World. During the lead-up to World War I and during the war, the industrial workers of the world organized widely in the city, and conflict between mine operators and unions escalated, with all of the associated nefarious private detectives and other people slinking around and other methods coming into play. Conflict between the IWW and the mine owners finally escalated during World War I, as the anti-war activists and organizers of the IWW agitated against the copper industry. A union organizer, Frank Little, drew the ire of the mine owners, and he was targeted, kidnapped, beaten, and tied to the rear bumper of a car, and dragged until he was finally lynched off of a bridge. Some of his assailants may have been police officers moonlighting as security guards for the mines. This labor strife, combined with other industrial accidents and unrest, led to the United States Army occupying the city during and after World War I, as the armaments industry was utterly dependent on Butte's copper. The women and children of Butte also formed their own lives and communities. During Prohibition, one woman was frequently arrested for running a distillery and moonshining ring. The children lived in ethnic alcoves and played on an industrial landscape, often cavorting on tailing piles and other mining detritus. Women associated into societies, churches, and clubs, and participated in the usual domestic tasks: food preparation, reproductive labor, laundry, housekeeping, etc. Women also worked outside of the home, in the bars and saloons, but also in laundries, newspapers, offices, radio stations, and other sectors. The Butte mines drove the city. Shift change in the mines dictated the schedule. The thrum of mining equipment gave it its soundscape. Headframes dotted the skylines. The smoke of engines and smelters filled the air. When a mine accident occurred, such as the catastrophic speculator disaster, the whole city felt it, whether the blast itself or knowing that it could have been any miner, any mine, any miner's wife's husband. Miners joined together in unions and in civic organizations, forming bonds of solidarity. It's easily arguable that Butte, Montana and Anaconda are the two most important cities in the Northern Rockies. Butte was the largest city between Minneapolis and Seattle, and among the most consequential copper-producing regions in the entire world. But Butte could not have produced its copper, and by extension driven its booming mining industry, without the construction of smelters in the town of Anaconda. Anaconda owes all of its historical richness to mining and smelting. Without it, Anaconda would not exist. Anaconda is a historic smelting town founded in 1883, and at one point, it had the largest copper smelting refining complex in the world. At its heyday, Anaconda was the perfect definition of industrial paternalism, and the Anaconda Copper Mining Company owned everything in town and provided shelter for its workers, stores for them to shop in, healthcare, and etc. Anaconda was a boomtown. It boasted the grandeur of the Montana Hotel, which now sits vacant. And it was one of the first Montana cities to have electric lights line its streets. True to what Thomas Andrews discusses in his book, the wealthy gravitated to the outskirts of town, upwind and uphill, while the working class and poor lived adjacent to the smelter and old works, in neighborhoods like historic Goosetown. The end of southwest Montana's mining economy in the 1960s to 80s, combined with the devastating environmental impact that Anaconda and Butte still deal with today, overshadow mining's glory days in southwest Montana. In fact, the entire downtown corridor, yes, Anaconda has a downtown, is designated as a National Historic District. Every neighborhood has homes listed on the register, and according to Julie, the best bar ever, Club Moderne, is also on the National Register. In fact, when Club Moderne caught fire 2 years ago, Julie worked with a team to help find grant money to restore it to its original splendor. Now, when Atlantic Ridgefield Company bought Anaconda Copper in the late 1970s, it turned around and closed the smelter in 1980 without any warning. The closure destroyed the economy of Anaconda and also brought to fore the environmental impact of the 100 years of smelting. This gave Anaconda a spot on the Environmental Protection Agency's National Priorities List, and the entire town is designated as a Superfund site. Decisions that town leaders, which were also mostly Anaconda Copper management, made over 100 years ago still impacts local government today. Julie thought it was very interesting that a large percentage of lifetime Anaconda residents, especially those who worked for or who had family members who worked for the smelter, would love to go back to the days when Anaconda took care of everyone and everything. And that nostalgia for the industrial paternalism is fascinating. Atlantic Ridgefield is not Anaconda's friend. Until recently, and pretty much under threat, Anaconda began the process of testing and remediating every yard in Anaconda, as well as many public spaces due to the high levels of arsenic in the soil. Even the Old Works golf course sits at the site of a former Anaconda Copperting Old Works site and serves as a permanent cap for the environmental waste from the smelter. Things are looking up for Anaconda. After 40 years, the economy is starting to tick up. Anaconda still has a very high poverty rate, but it's just above the state's poverty rate overall. Again, I need to thank Julie for her insight, and much of the words I read were hers. So thanks to Julie for her insight into Anaconda's history and for the fascinating view into a smelter town. I'm going to pick it up in the fourth mini lecture.